The shortcut. You're welcome to sometimes take me home. You've twisted around. Relax and turn in. Unplugged from the grid and nixed from the map, no traffic paint has touched this route of pitch and crushed stone. You're again on your own, with that one good mix of smooth summer jams. Past the perimeter of ruined garages, event horizons of pickup ball, your now far-flung point of departure floats like one of those fire balloons loosed from its war, known to turn up on tankers and buoys or even once on a highway in Fresno. Lit from its own bright molten core, it's visible only at certain angles and discrete times, though be advised it's really more of a holding place than a direct line charting your course. Walk on, beside the palisade fences, backyards with their Fisher-Price towns, and think of that distance. Not quite deep geological time, but enough for your mind's eye to cramp and slow, the hinges in your orbital bone to squeak, and come to it, waiting. The roadway will kindly call you're out. Mark what needs to be marked, but then, when you take it again, remember how it lengthens. Thank you so much for having me. That was a wonderful introduction. I was not expecting that at all from Rod. It's a pleasure to read tonight with Matt, and one of the best open mics, if not the best, I've read with or seen. So that was great. I hope that you'll forgive me. I'm going to read mostly, and by mostly I mean all, new stuff. My book is in a weird place right now. It's 2 years since I wrote it, and I'm in that place where a lot of it I wrote when I was in my mid to late 20s, and I'm trying to move sort of beyond it. I've read from it so much, and I'm working on a new project now. And what's great about readings, why I love doing them, is because sometimes you don't know how something's working, whether it works, how much you like it until you read it in front of people. It's a real litmus test for work. And so I'm going to read all new stuff tonight, a couple of poems from other people, so I hope you don't mind. And now that we're, and if we're in the apology mode, I'll apologize to my workshop people today, because I'm going to reread the poem I read in the workshop, which is called The Opiate Eaters. And it's a retelling of the Lotus Eater story from the Odyssey. Just as the quick Coles notes, Odysseus is coming back to Ithaca with his men. They're blown off course. They come to an island that's inhabited by this group of people called the Lotus Eaters, who live this really sedentary lifestyle, consuming the lotus plant, and have sort of resigned themselves to living this anesthetized life. And the story is about Odysseus having to pull his men away from the Lotus Eaters, because the drug is so powerful, or the plant is so powerful, that he has to pull them back to move on. So I sort of rewrote this as from the perspective of a foot soldier in a tour of duty in Afghanistan. So it's called The Opiate Eaters. We came then to a wholly sheltered plain, where all surfaces seemed to radiate the same gray hue. Between the serrated mountain tips of Panjawai and the Rorschach wisps of far Kabul, we parked our LAVs and settled into the drift of a soft-blowing wind, unmarred by sand or stench or snow. Behind us, there was rolling thunder and crackle and spit. There was sky chewed up by Chinook blade and the miles of sleek, boot-eating mud. We couldn't believe how far we'd come. Here were shimmering blue-green streams that knotted minutes into days, all one long day in permanent dusk. There, the opiate eaters found us. With the ground-down dust of starlight in their palms, they brought us rest and sharp relief. Whoever took it in and slunk down in the sand found a world carved off from sense, down, down, a still mobile of smoke and land. What was the flagpole warping gust that brought us here, and why was it us, carrying our rifles between our knees in the bison's lone dark, combing our helmets into our heads and tossing our bottles? And deeper, further, the resistance moved into grape fields, wheat, and caves. We couldn't believe how long we'd stayed. And it was good to be there, loosed but not yet far flung gone, lying in the pin-pricked sun, laughing even but not afraid. Oh, 52nd Infantry of the wide Alberta North, we will not turn and be lugged back by one lone cable. It's enough to be this deftly leveled. Let us pass it on to others who will come this way. I took the train here, and it's the first time I've taken the train in a long time. So I hope you'll humor me. I want to try to recite a poem from memory, and it's a poem called "The Tunnel" by Paul Farley, who's one of my favorite poets. He's a UK poet, and it's all about the experience of going through a tunnel on a train. So I'm gonna just I know it, but I haven't done it from memory for a little while. So, but it's a great poem. So it goes like this: a tunnel. A tunnel, unexpected. The carriage lights we didn't know weren't on prove their point, while outside a summer's day is cancelled, its greens and scattered blues, forgotten in an instant that lasts the width of a down from level to level, a blink in London to Brighton in 4 minutes, that dampens mobiles. Conversations end mid-sentence before speakers can say, a tunnel. And the train fills with the sound of itself, the rattle of rolling stock amplified, and in the windows flew a tool shed scent, metal on metal, a points flash photograph. And inside all of this, a thought is clamoring in a skull, inside the train, inside the tunnel, inside great folds of time, like a cube of chalk in a puncture repair tin by the roadside of a summer's day, like the kind we'll re-enter at any moment, please at any moment. Voices are waiting on the other end to pick up where we left off and say, it was a tunnel. Thanks. Okay. This next one is, it's called an onium. If you look at the periodic table, there are a number of elements. There's 92 naturally occurring elements, and then from 92 to I believe it's 118 they have now, they're all artificially made. They're made in laboratories. And from 112 or 113 up, they all have really weird names, placeholder names, and they all start with UN. There's an onium, an uxbium, I can't remember all of them, but anyways, these are the ones that are made in CERN, or maybe not CERN, but the atom smashing, the atom smashers of the past. So this I really like. I'm going to read some poems based on the more known elements a little bit later, but this is a poem that I really liked the name an onium, and I just wrote this after that. What I should say about these elements is that they're incredibly small, and they can only make them last for a fraction of a second. They're so powerful because they're man-made, and they decay almost instantaneously. Okay, so an onium. The parts behind the real brewed coffee thump until the cup appears. Above, the vents pump in air, and 10 stories down, a jungle gym assembles itself without instructions. She has her finger on a buzzing string, too loose to play, and the melody is like those elements whose shape and color still aren't known, contrived in deep underground tunnels, elements that haven't been put together to form the world's heaviest currency that tears through your pockets and tears through the earth into space where it makes a comet. As she tunes, the kids arrive in tidal wave and crawl right side up along the monkey bars and go backwards up the slide. And at the mini-mart across the street, a man unloads skids of pop. But when she tunes the string, now taught enough to play, before she plays, he's standing on a balcony in his free and democratic country, smoking a cigarette, but when he pulls this drag, he wavers like a signal. There's a picture that inspired this next one. It's the picture of, or the Toland Man. If you haven't seen this, it's probably our our oldest mummy, our oldest mummified corpse, and it's been preserved so well. You can see the image or the expression on the man's face perfectly. And so if you just type in Tolan Man into a search engine, this image will come up. It was very moving, very amazing image. It turns out that it's already been written about by many great authors, Seamus Heaney being one of them. So I didn't want to try to write, in his shadow. But I thought about what it would be like, or this poem is sort of about finding somebody and what happens after what happens after the excavation. And so it's finding somebody in a cold place. I sort of imagined it in the Antarctic. So it's called Man in Snow. When they found him there, vaulted in ice, having forged no way and left no tracks, they cut him out and unfolded him. They snapped him from every conceivable angle. In his wallet were his name and address and the other effects he was fastened to. But he wore no coat and his sandals were anomalies, this being a southernmost latitude of one especially difficult circle. So they brought him in and unfolded him again, this being the wing of great advances. Samples were crushed and stirred into greens and blues. Tests came back in pinpointed ages. When he was put on display, when books were written and cyberspace rippled, people came to see him in his glassed-in room, looking out, his face suggesting something like stifled glee or steadfast rage, or even, to some, utter bemusement. There were theories about his circuitous trek and schools of thought. There were variables that none could wholly account for, the pebble in his mouth or the stitch in his side. But it seemed then, from some glaring trick, given the position he was pinned to, and the small but subtle distortions in the glass, that he wasn't in fact static at all, but swimming past the 3D renderings of himself, the small-scale reproductions of his habitat, until it seemed he had caught some deeper tide and was leaving us, standing beneath him, wearing the faces we were pinned to from our own surprise, some of us as engineers and some of us as disciples. We had a great inventor, we had many great inventors, but one of the most memorable for me, because I love music, is somebody named Hugh McCain, who actually, if you've been to the National Museum of Science and Technology here in Ottawa, there's a display for him there with one of his synthesizers that he created called the Sackbut synthesizer. It's just a wonder to go see. He didn't really care about the way it looked. He was more into creating, well, basically what he did is he created the first electronic synthesizer. Now, if you think about that, if you really think about that, that's amazing. Somebody here in Ontario in the 40s created the first electronic synthesizer. And it's a shame that that it isn't more known, or that it hasn't lasted. I mean, what they have at the National Museum of Science and Technology is great, but there was a point at which it was they were figuring out whether they were going to mass market his synthesizer types, and so in some 2 dials to the left reality, we could mention him in the same breath as we could mention Moog synthesizers, and so this is about going to the Museum of Science and Technology and seeing that display that's there, which I urge you to go to if you haven't been there. So this is called At the Museum of Science and Technology in memoriam of Hugh McCain. Here are the grossly educational displays. Giant holograms, electric guitars strung with light, and nebula spread out onto canvas that might fold up neatly in your pocket. You could imagine streaming in with parents helming their kids and hanging the traffic up with their coats, moving past the litany of discounts into the exhibit, where familiars float in blown-up photographs, perpetually brilliant. The B-7 snow machine, full goalie mask and hulking deep rover, polyurethane brains full of solutions, all cradled behind the palmed-up glass and snippets of patients wearing narration. The difficult problems are solved here and then solved again, so that when someone comports themselves down on one knee, so that you might expect the drone of an organ filling the high backlit ceiling, cutting through your fresh mistakes, what was easy over what was hard. No need to dwell, though. It turns out they're simply adjusting a lens, leaning carefully into a bio, or tapping the deep amnesia of a phone. Somebody far away wants to talk, nothing important. But if you'd stopped as I'd stopped in front of LeCain's corner display and watched the weather of cameras roll in, you'd see his sackbutt keyboard flicker, all threadbare parts and makeshift dials, as if assembled by hurricane or amateur god. You'd see his giant black and white likeness stringing minute but infinite currents, all the metal, wood, and wire coming in scrap but leaving tuned. I think of him tweaking blips in Cape Breton but quietly building touch-sensitive organs, one after another, wiry and strong, in the long, slow slide of government funding. I think of him writing, "What am I doing? I'm bloody well building filthy circuits," and continuing on, which must have felt something like losing the tune but having to keep on playing the song. And when the voice comes on to tell us how much time we have, what cars still lighted in the lot, it isn't hard to want to stop, hunker down, but then I'm deftly nudged away from that idea, through the lobby and gift shop. See how I'm doing for time here. Okay, I might need to speed up a bit. Okay, I think I'm going to just bypass a few poems and read this, just a few more. And this is called Foley Artistry. Foley Artistry is the part of making movies that is manufacturing the sounds of the movies, not the soundtracks. It's not the composer. It's people who make, like in action movies when someone gets punched, that punch sound is not recorded when the action is happening. So it has to be sort of manufactured later in a studio environment. And why I wrote this poem is because one thing I noticed about movies, especially when you go to the theater, is so much of the movie is in the sound, is in these sounds. Not the actual, again, not the music, but the sounds that are being made while the movie's happening. And so this poem kind of takes that concept and takes off with it. So Foley artist is somebody who does that. So Foley artistry. This is the sound I was trying to make. In the film, they're shooting a big budget prequel to Jaws, but the rubber shark heads are being eaten by a real-life shark. The sound of the rubber pieces being chewed. Not easy, but I'd done harder and worse, which makes me think. I knew a boy named Kevin when I was too young to know the difference between rubber and real, though rubber is real. And Kevin knew a place to hide in the valley so good that no one ever found him, though he kept appearing, startling people in their sliding doors. He was locked in the glass, as if he'd done something so sinister his punishment needed flair to amuse the ones who'd been wronged. Once, though, someone snapped a photo and swore it was Kevin there watching. We all knew it was bunk, the person knew too, but then we started talking about it. Do you remember that time I stuck a pin in his waterbed for no reason really? Or the time he got dressed up as his mother but not in her clothes? We retrieved the old albums, unpacked the tape boxes, found the one botched life-size drawing he'd done of himself, and completed it together as a neighborhood, a district, a city, practically a nation at this point, and then a sort of galaxy, expanding outward at a speed so great, when Kevin walked out of the picture with a boom, it almost wasn't a surprise, so fast were we moving. But Kevin was back, and he shook our hands, revealed the crevice he'd made in the dirt, and told everyone sorry for pulling this stunt. And then he lived his long life. He married, had children, difficult years, divorced, rebuilt, and doubled back to the start again on this slight tilt. In the film, they don't need to add any sounds to the mix, because the shark that swims in and chews up all our likenesses is already perfectly captured. Okay, one final short one, I think that puts me at about 20 minutes, is called Hoberman Sphere. Hoberman Sphere is a toy, the modern Slinky. I really need to buy one so I can demonstrate it while I read this. It looks like a collapsed bunch of plastic struts, and you put your hands on either side of it, and you pull on it, and it expands, and it becomes a large spherical object. So yeah, this poem is sort of written as an homage to this toy, Hoberman Sphere. You haven't seen the oceans spin from airless space, or lifted anything free from its orbit, but in your hands the sphere becomes a small-scale model of the Earth. Between your palms the struts expand, a dozen scissors cutting an infinity of endpoints loose. So Richard James, hired to keep sensitive gauges safe at sea, found instead a movement in the broken springs and made the slinky. The slinky sold impressively, but James, now famous, left his family for a Bolivian cult. Oh, if I could gather the very struts, the silvery beams, and stretch them out to a point so wide, you'd think you could walk right through it and away from your natural life. Thanks. And I want to thank Tree Reading Series for having me. I know I forgot that, but thank you so much for having me. It's been great, and Pearl as well for having me at the workshop earlier. That was great. So thank you.